All right, so I'm trying out a new recording software on my phone. I try to do everything on my phone. I have limited access to my computer because my 5 kids usually are demanding it or demanding of me when I'm around. So when I'm on the road, it's a little easier to do this type of thing, and I usually keep my phone to myself. So I've put everything together on Evernote, and I hope this format works. If not, please leave me some feedback, and I'll think on how to better do things. And if you like watching my face as I talk, or you just want to look at the document, let me know what seems to work for you all. So I've titled this kind of Revelation in the Heavens, and the idea behind here is starting with the Revelation 12 sign in the sky, the great sign in the sky, which I think kicked everything off for the end times, or at least that's what I'm looking towards. A year, I don't know, maybe it's been 14, 15 months since that occurred, and there's been a lot of dates that people have thrown out there, and I've I've taken serious consideration into each one of them, but with each new date that comes and passes, there's a little part of me that's kind of disappointed. Now, sometimes it's actually encouraging, but the point is that this has happened over the past year. A lot of people were looking at, okay, the year of Jubilee was extended through 2018, which it was, but nothing's happened. I believe the Jubilee's ended, and I've really been pressing into the Lord on having me, give me some more insight or wisdom into His timelines and understanding what these signs mean. And so this was a product of me just meditating upon this, and I think the Lord was just kind of guiding me to really study and press into this more that I haven't really seen anyone else do. So I did it, and I hope this helps everyone and helps frame the events that are about ready to unfold. I believe we have some time before we're raptured, but if it happens sooner, I'm not here, to claim an award of, hearing the voice of the Lord the best. I believe everyone has been given a clue, or a lot of people who are putting out videos are getting clues from the Lord and just misinterpreting them. And we're children who want to see our Father. We've been longing for Him, and so it's understandable that we're excited. So, anyways, just getting in and diving into the material. I just want to kind of start off with just setting a basic foundation for even looking into the sky, on looking for the Lord in the sky and the things that He has communicated to us in His creation. A lot of people call this astrology. I call it, holy astronomy, that this is something God's created and Satan's come along and corrupted it, and he's invested, the occult and given that type of association with it. And I think part of that ruse, that scheme, is to keep people far away. It's like, I'm not going to look at that because, that's astrology. That's worshiping Satan. That's soothsaying, whatever name you want to call it. I think Satan has intentionally attacked it to keep people who are trying to learn more about the Lord away from that part of His creation. And so just right off the bat, the Lord in Genesis 1:14 said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for years, and for days and years." And so right here, He's already said He's put up His sun, moon, and stars to be for signs. So, right there, God has established a purpose for Him. And just because we've ignored it for so many years, I can't say what the antediluvian ancient fathers did, because not much is written in the Bible other than Job, which does make reference to Orion and the Pleiades and some constellations in there. But we don't know a lot of how God has communicated in the stars, before Moses and before the Torah. But there are, even in the Old Testament, there are references to signs that were given. I believe it's either in Amos, that refers to some sign that was done, that referencing a sign 2 years before. You have the Star of Bethlehem, which is not recorded in the Old Testament, but it's certainly recorded in the New Testament as something that had already occurred, and it was evidently given to some people because they were able to look in the heavens and say, oh, the Messiah is born, let's go seek him out. So certainly I believe those who have pursued the Lord and are, they've got a walking, they have a walk with him. I believe he, personally gives some insight and reveals some of the mystery that he's put up in the stars. So I'm going pretty slow on my points here, but over the span of millennium, the stars in the skies are fixed. They don't really move much, and if there is much movement, it's because of the rotation or the movement of the Earth's axis that points to a slightly different part of the sky. But that's more of a slight angle shift than it is anything else. And then so the stars are fixed, and then you've got 7 stars or heavenly bodies, and I put quotes under stars really to refer to heavenly bodies that travel the night sky, that travel across the ecliptic over the year, and that's the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So these were all observable objects to ancient cultures throughout history, and so I believe those were very important to them in terms of understanding what was going on and observing what they could observe basically, and what they named and how they named it and that everything. And so the last 5 that I listed are planets, but the ancient derivation for planet means wandering star. So ancient folks, before they really had a lot of technology, looked at these things as stars that traveled the sky. So moving on a little bit here, I believe these 7 stars, heavenly bodies, along with the constellation, make up an elaborate, finely tuned timepiece the Lord has placed in the heavens. And so when we're talking about a timepiece, we've made one. It's called a clock. It's pretty simple. It's got seconds, minutes, and hours hand, at least your analog version of that, and they all point to different numbers that are placed upon the clock. And so throughout the day, you have the second hand that you can readily observe. The minute hand's a little bit slower, and the hour moves very slowly. But over the course of the day, you can precisely reference a point in time of the day and say, hey, this occurred at 1:23, 56 seconds. So it's a way of referencing time. Now, since we're talking timepiece, I believe God's clock, or at least one of his clocks that he's put up there that he's created in the sky, has 7 different hands, and those would be the Sun, the Moon, and the 5 planets, and that he uses these so he can mark his wonders through signs. And some of them are, have been revealed to us. The best example is Revelations 12, 1 and 2, which occurred last September. So those are the planets, and then the constellations are like the numbers on our clock. As the planets and the Sun and the Moon progress through their orbits, or as the Earth is orbiting, they appear to be in different parts of the constellations. And there are 12 constellations that are universally recognized in the ecliptic. And so I believe these are the numbers on God's clocks. And the planets and the stars and the moon, they're all like 7 different hands that point to different parts of the clock. So, so the last point I want to make about this is, man-made clocks are rather, one-dimensional and utilitarian. And what I mean by that is there's not really much to them. There's not much story to the numbers that we put on our clock. They're just made mainly just to reference time and to allow everyone to know, if you need to meet somebody, you all have a basis for, when that time is. However, God's clock, I believe, spans many dimensions that go beyond, certainly within time, but all those, the constellations, instead of numbers, there's constellations, and each of those constellations have a lot of story and history behind them. And so when you have 7 hands with all these marvelous constellations that tell a story, it's just, any particular alignment in the sky, if there is meaning to it, there's an ocean of wonder, mystery, and beauty to it all, I believe. One of the things that I've grown a lot of appreciation in my walk since the Revelation 12 sign and just really diving into that is my appreciation for what's going on in the sky. I wake up to stellarium and I just look, okay, where are the planets today? And if it's a clear sky, I go out and look. Lately, Venus has been rising right before the sun, and man, it is spectacular. It's really beautiful, and Spica's right near it, and it just helps appreciate God's creation a little bit. For me, it helps appreciate His creation a little bit more, and start a conversation. What are you doing, Lord? And just talking to Him about it. So I'm going to pause right here. I'll pick this up later, but I've enjoyed our conversation so far. Hey, it's Peter again, and just trying to pick up where I left off. Hopefully I won't get too much of a transition, because it's been about 3 days since I made my last part of this video, but I do want to complete the material before posting this video. So we left off with just talking about God's clock and how mysterious and full of wonder and beauty it is, and it's just something to ponder. And I believe, these are one of the things that you can just probe deep with the Lord on. The intent is to have a relationship with the Lord, and so, astrology is an attempt to draw you away from the Lord and try to explain or set your fate based upon the alignment of the stars. But if you go to the Lord and you ask, if there's any meaning to the stars that He's aligned, that's a conversation you're starting with Him. So I don't really see any problem with that at all. The point is where's your source of information? If your source is from the Lord, I believe He's going to reveal His mysteries to you. If it's from something outside the Lord, then that's evil, and that's serving another god or another system. So just getting that straight there. So just driving in here, this little snapshot just shows some of the planets, different planets, orbital periods, and with the emphasis on Jupiter, which this whole series of videos, maybe 2 or 3 of them, will be focused on Jupiter and that piece of his clock. So many other pieces I don't understand. This one, I think maybe I've been given a little bit of insight, so that's what I'm going to focus this discussion on. So I probably covered most of these points down here about reference, science reference in His Word, especially Revelation and the Star of Bethlehem. I haven't searched any more beyond that. So yeah, this last point here, Jupiter, using Jupiter as the primary hand of God's clock, I believe God has written the story of Revelation, and the story goes above and below the ecliptic. Things that are above tend to be heavenly, and things that below are either earthly or things from the abyss or from Hades, Satan's domain. So getting right into it, the timeline. So I believe everything kicked off with Revelations 12, 1 and 2. And it says, "A great sign appeared in the heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth." So I believe this all started in November of 2016 with a comet that's been dubbed the Conception Comet. It's a comet that travels outside of our solar system. They believe it has an orbital period of tens of thousands of years. So depending on your view of the length of years of the Earth, this thing hasn't entered our solar system possibly since this Earth was formed by the Lord. So it has, as it's been coming into our solar system, it's projecting itself into Leo. And then right as we approached November of 2016, it darted right from Leo, and over the course of a few weeks, it went through Virgo and over to Libra, which it will remain for the next 10,000 years, just based upon physics. But the interesting thing is it shot through the womb of Virgo, this comet. Its official scientific name is 2017 E1, which actually means it was discovered after it had actually gone through the womb. But once the astronomers figure out, orbital parameters of an object, they can determine where it was. So no one observed this at the time that this occurred, but backing out, we can tell that this went through the womb of Virgo in November of 16, and it was exiting November 17th, just as Jupiter was entering the womb. And so this isn't anything that's been given to me. The credit goes to Luis Vega, which a lot of you might be familiar with. That this was a conception event, and this started actually the Revelation 12, 1 and 2, the development, symbolically, the development of the church inside of Virgo. So it's interesting how, the seed of the Spirit was put into Jupiter, Christ's body, and able to develop within this virgin Virgo, which I believe is actually symbolically Israel. So moving on, so as I move through these charts here, I'm going to throw out some dates that I don't have any explanation for, but I just felt like the Spirit told me just to note them in case someone has insight on what may have occurred on these dates or what the symbology of these things might be. So everyone's very familiar. I believe that's probably dialing into this channel that the church was born on 23rd September 2017. You see here, you've got Leo up above with the 9 primary stars in the constellation, with Venus, Mars, and Mercury forming the crown on top of this woman's head. So those are the 12 stars. You have the sun at her shoulders, clothing her in the sun. If you just imagine a spotlight, the sun is just projecting its rays on the woman. And then below you have the moon, and Jupiter has exited the womb, and it's positioned near Spica. I believe I have a verse down here. Spica, in some languages, is directly translated to mean not a branch of wheat, but a sprig of wheat or something like that. But it's also in other languages translated as the branch. And so I was reading through Zechariah, and I was just kind of just blown away, looking where Jupiter is near Spica, and how in some ancient languages the word for Spica means the branch. So Zechariah 3:8, listen, high priest Joshua, you and your associates seated before you, who are men symbolic of things to come, I'm going to bring you my servant, the branch. So I just made that connection just reading my Bible one day, and I was just kind of blown away how Jupiter was birthed right next to a star, meaning the branch, which is a reference for Jesus and, in this case, the body of Christ. So if we fast forward, I'm kind of low tech here with my presentation, but on 11/13/2017, so almost 2 months after the birth, Jupiter and Venus conjunct. So I believe those are significant dates because it's the body. Venus, if you read Revelation, Jesus refers to him as the morning star. So I believe Venus is the head and Jupiter is the body. So anytime those two conjunct, especially now that we're in this timeline of Revelation, I believe there's significance to that. I don't have any insight on this particular date, but I just wanted to point it out. So before we leave Virgo, as we go on in Revelation, the woman is given wings of an eagle. But backing up to Zechariah, I believe there was a prophecy about that in there. I was just reading Zechariah about a month ago. I was just blown away with all the Revelation parallels that were in there. So Zechariah 5:9-11. Then I looked up, and there before me were two women with wind in their wings. They had wings like those of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between heaven and earth. Where are they taking the basket? I asked the angel who was speaking to me. He replied, to the country of Babylonia, to build a house for it. When the house is ready, the basket will be set in its place. And I believe this is a direct reference or prophecy, foreshadowing of Revelation 12:14, where the woman was given the two wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time out of the serpent's reach. And that's near the end of Revelation 12. So these are just some of the connections I've made from the Old Testament to the New that were, I believe, they're all prophecy, but they all kind of support each other. Okay, so after the church is born, within a couple of months, on the winter solstice seems to be an important date for a lot of these events. Jupiter enters the scales of justice, which is Libra. And Libra separates Virgo from Scorpio. You can see Virgo in the upper right, and you can see the claw of Scorpio in the bottom left. And actually, I believe this is a snapshot from last week when I took this, which was November 11th, where you see Jupiter almost entering Scorpio. So I believe this is a period of time where the Lord is judging the churches. In Revelation 2 and 3, Jesus talks about 7 churches there, and each church is given a warning. Well, not actually, many of the churches are given a warning. So I believe he's judging people based upon what church they belong to. And I haven't really studied this in depth, but I have a suspicion that some churches may be the church that gets raptured. And then at the end of Revelation, it refers to other children. And I believe those are some of the churches where Jesus is warning them about judgment or removing a lampstand or whatever it might be. That there might be people within the church that have to go through a tribulation. I know that this is probably opening a big can of worms. I don't mean to get too distracted on that. But the point being is that there is some kind of weighing and judging going on between the birth of the church and before, I believe, Jupiter enters Scorpio and war breaks out in heaven. And here we are. We're almost on this date. What is today? The 18th. So we're within a couple days of leaving Libra. And I'm just going to fast forward right here. You can see Libra and Scorpio. The right claw of Scorpio is just kind of intermingled on the scales of justice, Libra. So it's a very quick transition out of Libra. And so I believe this symbolically represents war breaking out in heaven. So I think we're almost there. I don't know how that's going to manifest itself on this earth, but I believe this is a significant date for the progression towards the end times, the tribulation, and our rapture. So I believe Scorpio and Ophiuchus. So Scorpio is the constellation that's associated with in the zodiac, the 12 numbers in the sky, if you will. But I think Ophiuchus looms much larger than Scorpio, so I kind of combine the two. But Scorpio is more of a reference point for folks because not everyone associates Ophiuchus with being part of the zodiac or the Mazzaroth. So I believe this is representative of Revelation 12:7. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. Now, an interesting thing to note, and I hope it comes out in this picture. If not, I'll try to get a blow up later. But Scorpio's tail is actually is right on the edge of the galactic center of the Milky Way. So if there's a grouping of stars that's most concentrated in our sky, it would be the galactic center of the Milky Way. I mean, there's billions of stars right there. So it's from our observation point, its tail is positioned right in the point to throw down a third of the stars in the sky. So I found that kind of interesting. It's the position of its tails. So moving on. So an interesting thing, if you're familiar with the lunar tetrads that occurred in 2014 and 15, we also had two lunar eclipses that I think are very significant in 2018, which would make 6 blood moons in the series of the end times. We have a 7th one coming up here in January, and I believe this is significant of some sort of completion event that the Lord is at a bare minimum. You can just look at all the tables. This will be the last full lunar eclipse for a while. And on this date, interestingly enough, Jupiter and Venus conjunct. So the body of Christ and the head of Christ are coming together on the day that we have another blood moon. So if that's not a confirmation that this is a completion event, I don't know what is. I'm sure there's a deeper meaning on this, but I just wanted to bring this out, that this is I believe, an important date. So summer of 19. So we're jumping ahead here a little bit. So Jupiter does a retrograde just like it did. I didn't mention in Libra, but Jupiter did a retrograde during the past year in Libra. So it went through almost all of Libra and went back to the tip of it before it went back into Scorpio, which is where we are almost right now. So it's going to do the same thing in summer of 19. And so I was talking about a war breaking out in heaven. So I made this little snapshot here, and I hope you can read all the characters that are in here. But if you look above the ecliptic, which I believe is representative of heaven, you've got two different scenes, I believe, of the war going in heaven. If you look in your upper left, you have Draco the dragon, which is certainly referenced in Revelation 12. You have Hercules fighting a multi-headed serpent, which again, I think points back to the same dragon. And as he's battling the serpent, his foot is on the head of Draco. So if you go back to Genesis, the curse on the serpent, where he would bruise the heel of the man, but the man would crush the head of the serpent, it's written right here. So it's being written right in this Hercules and Draco, the battles going on there. And then you have Ophiuchus here, who is known as the serpent bearer, battling a serpent who's going after a crown called Corona Borealis right above his head. He is restraining him, which I believe is, either the Holy Spirit or Michael. You have Ophiuchus, which in Revelation 12, I believe is Michael. And then you have the scorpion again, nipping at, I believe, the heels of Ophiuchus. He's on the lower portion of where Ophiuchus is. So you've got two scenes of this battle breaking out in heaven, represented in these four different constellations. They're all aligned. They're all in the same sector of the sky. So, I believe this is highly representative of the war breaking out in heaven. And if you move on to Sagittarius, which I will cover in a moment again, I believe Sagittarius is also part of this battle, but being fought on this earth. But you can see where his arrow's pointed. His arrow's pointed right to the center of the scorpion, which I believe is representative of Satan, or at least, one of Satan's subjects. So talking about the first horseman in Sagittarius, I'll probably get to a verse here soon, but I believe this is the first horseman at Revelation, I can't remember, 5 or 6, introduces the horsemen. The first one is, I believe, on a white horse, but the point I want to make is he also has a crown. And so right next to this horseman, Sagittarius, is a crown. So I just find it very interesting that this is written right here in the constellation, in the zodiac. So some more dates. So November 19 through the winter solstice of 20. We got the winter solstice again. So Jupiter and Venus enter Sagittarius just as Venus and Jupiter are conjuncting. So I believe that would occur on the 24th of November, 2019. So again, there's like symbology, it's just when Jupiter and Venus conjunct, there's two instances here where it coincides with a very important date. So I just think that's confirmation for the gravity of those dates. I think something important is happening or being established on those dates. So as Jupiter's entering Sagittarius, it's now in the same constellation as Saturn. A lot of people associate Saturn with Satan. Let's see if I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll reserve that for a moment. So I just did want to cover some scripture here that support where we are in the constellations. So the first seal / horseman, Revelation 6:2. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. So that describes Sagittarius. And this just more supports the war in heaven that I believe was prophesied in Psalms. And as I read the Bible and I see a connection, I just throw it out there. So I'm just going to read a couple Psalms. Psalms 58:7. Let them melt away as waters which run continually. When he bendeth his bow to shoot his arrows, let them be cut in pieces. And Psalm 64:7. But God shall shoot them with an arrow, and suddenly shall they be wounded. So now I just want to address Saturn for a moment. I had long, and I think part of my hang-up with trying to understand the Revelation timeline as written in the constellation I made the assumption it was associated with Satan. But, and it really took me a while to convince myself that it wasn't that. I had to really do a lot of research into the background of Saturn and how different ancient cultures, what god they associated with it and what that god represented. Because I mean, ultimately it's the symbology that I'm going after, and what have, other cultures assign meaning to the planet. So I did start off with the Mazaroth, and they assigned the name Shabbatai. That's the best I can pronounce that, but or Shabbatai, which means the restful one. So immediately, it's not, it doesn't have any connotation of evil or bad. At least the Hebrews. So ancient cultures generally associate the planet after the first offspring of primordial gods. So if you look at the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, in their mythology, they all have, it all points back to a source of one or two gods. And so these gods, through some event or whatever it might be, have offspring. And so Saturn's usually associated with the first generation of those offspring. And so, moving on, Jupiter's generally associated with the second generation. So if Jupiter wasn't an offspring of Saturn, which sometimes he isn't, but I guess universally he is kind of a second generation and the current ruler of the kings and gods. So most mythology kind of trace everything, and you get to this, you've got the grandparents, the parents, and the children, and those tend to be the ruling kings and gods and mythological stories. So yeah, like Zeus and Jupiter. I can't remember what the Norse god was. Maybe it wasn't Thor. Odin. I don't know. I don't remember. But it's that second generation. So where I believe the association with Saturn with Satan comes from is actually the Greeks. And the Greeks are kind of an anomaly, if you will, to other cultures and their mythology of how Saturn came about. So in Greek mythology, Saturn is Kronos, and he was a very violent person. He killed his own, well, he didn't kill his own father, but he did something very wicked to his father to take power from him, and he usurped his power. And through his own violence, he was always kind of paranoid that his own children would do the same thing, which they did. So Zeus overthrew Kronos over time. So when we start looking at other ancient cultures, including the Romans, which is where we get the Saturn and Jupiter from, did not originally depict such a violent figure for Saturn. And they generally associate with a more benign role, and usually associated with agriculture. And the Romans only later on adopted the story of the Greeks and assigned Saturn, if you want to call it like a modernized version of Saturn from the Roman culture, did it take on a more violent role. And over time it was, as post-Christ AD, in the gladiator times, Saturn was a central figure for that. But anyways, I tend to give more weight to things what ancients associated with and what man came along and altered as time went along. And so just bottom line is ancient Roman culture did not have the story that the Greeks had. So I believe, in conclusion, I believe Saturn means rest. And as Saturn's pointing to different parts of the constellation, it's pointed to some kind of rest or break or whatever as it's going through the different parts of the zodiac. Okay, so Sagittarius is an interesting time. March 18th, 2020, there's a triple conjunction of Moon, Mars, and Venus, which I believe is indicative of upcoming war against the church. On March 31st, 2020, Mars and Saturn conjunct, which I think is indicative that whatever restful period that there's war that's going to come upon the Sabbath or rest or whatever, something to do with that theme. And so Saturn does wander out of Sagittarius, and it almost enters Capricorn. And in fact, if you look at, I don't know if I have it on the picture below. No, I don't. But it basically, and I guess I'll just leave it here, it basically goes right up to the mouth of Capricorn, and then both Jupiter and Saturn do a retrograde. And I think Saturn retrogrades actually back into Sagittarius. And so that kind of starts around May of 2020. And then after the retrograde is completed, Saturn and Jupiter conjunct as it's in this no man's land between Capricorn and Sagittarius. And so I think this is very prophetic for the rapture. And if it's not going to happen that day, which we've found many times that we're seeing signs, so maybe it's not going to happen that day, but I believe it's very prophetic that the near is almost at hand. So just real quickly here, Jupiter and Saturn align. I believe this is representative of the body of Christ entering its rest and soaring to its heavenly abode above. And I wanted to point out the imagery that's associated of freedom with Delphinus and Cygnus, along with praise and worship embodied in Lyra. So I'm going to go down here and just looking at what's aligned, as you look up in the sky, what's the story being told at this point in the constellation. So you have Aquila, the eagle. I believe that's representative of the woman getting her wings and being taken to a place in the wilderness for 1260 days. I believe for the church, it's the rapture embodied in Delphinus. You see a dolphin. That kind of reminds me, if you've read C.S. Lewis, The Last Battle, that last chapter where everyone is running and the new earth has been established and people just have this abundance of energy. They're like swimming up waterfalls, running up and down mountains, through valleys. That dolphin, a dolphin just represents that unbounded energy. And then you have Cygnus up there in the upper left, and that's just a marvelous bird. It's just majestic. And then in the heavenly abode, you have Lyra, which is which is a harp. And so we're going to be singing praises. We're going to be in the presence of the Lord, the part of the church that gets raptured at this point. You just look at the constellation. It just tells you I believe this just tells the story of what's going to happen at this time. So, okay, so what else did I want to say? Okay. So, talked about Israel. Venus on that day is in the claw of Scorpio. So, that's the head of Christ. So, that's just kind of representative of, I don't know, the period of time. I'm just speculating that Jesus's influence is being cut off. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that, but it's an observation. Mars is right between Andromeda and Cetus. I'll get into this later, not in this video, but Mars is representative of war. Cetus, I believe, is representative of the beast from the sea in Revelation 13. Andromeda is that prostitute. I don't know, Revelation 15, 16, 17, I can't remember. So the alignment of the planets on this day just point to the start of the tribulation, our rapture, and it happens on winter solstice, which is the darkest time of the year for most people in this world. So it's happening on a very dark moment in history. So I just, I look at all these rapture dates that are being presented, and they just don't rise to the level of this sign that's going to happen on December 21st, 2020. So some other things that, just throwing it out there, possible political developments that will be occurring at that time. There might be a flashpoint in the United States with the completed presidential election in 2020. Trump gets elected again. This nation might become unglued. Someone else gets elected. It still might result in the same thing. The state of Israel, a lot of people are talking about the third temple being constructed. There's a lot of talk in Jerusalem about that. Is that going to start then, or is it going to be in progress? I mean, it's something to watch. Erdogan, rise to a world leader. I believe Erdogan is a good candidate for the Antichrist. He's a very savvy politician, and he just seems to have the ability to bring a lot of people to into his alliance. The dragon sign in the sky. This is something I'm watching for. This is something that needs to happen before December 21st, 2020. I'm looking for this. If it doesn't happen before then I'm going to greatly discount the significance of the sign. I believe that we need to see Revelation 1, 2, 3, and 4 being fulfilled in the sky somehow. I was hoping last October Draco was going to be this sign, but I was out there watching it and with my kids and everything, and it was fun from a family activity because I think it was about a 200 to 300 meteor per hour event. But at the end of the day, it wasn't anything that was being reported in the news. It wasn't, on a historical scale, anything significant. So this thing needs to occur before I believe the rapture happens. And then earthquakes, hurricanes, famines, plagues on a historic scale. A lot of people point to this. A lot of watchmen are, are, in my opinion, hypersensitive to different earthquakes and hurricanes. Not much talk about famines and plagues because quite honestly, I don't see much of that going on right now. When you look at a historical scale, things are pretty benign right now. So are we in the days of Noah? Or are these things going to happen in the tribulation? I haven't really answered that question, but these are some of the things that watchmen look for. And none of these things are occurring on a historical scale at this point. So, I'll just leave it at that for now. So now, before I end up, I just want to do a quick rundown of the rest of the tribulation period. And I'm going to go right into Stellarium, and just quickly do a quick walkthrough. I know this video has probably been long, but I just kind of want to give a complete picture here and leave you with that before signing off. So right here, I'm going to go to Stellarium. Let's see. Okay, so we ended right here, right before Capricorn. So I believe Capricorn represents Satan, the dragon, being hurled to earth. Capricorn is in a transition state. It's going from a goat into a fish. So I think that's very representative of what you're going to see in Revelation 13. So he's been cast down to the earth. He's been in heaven. He's been up there as the accuser, accusing the saints, before God's throne day and night. And now he's been thrown down. So he has to go through this transitional period. I think that's what Capricorn represents. Aquarius is the next constellation. I believe this is representative of the dragons spewing out water and pursuing the woman. I believe this is actually a protracted period of time, especially when you look at the length of time that Jupiter has to go through these constellations. So Satan's pursuit of Israel is going to be, it's going to happen for some time. And when I say some time, probably a year to 2 years. But the water being spilled out is what I believe indicative of the water age, the water period of Revelation, which starts in Revelation 13. And so I think it kicks off and kind of is the introduction where Satan's, standing, at the, on a shore, and the second beast comes out. And I believe the second beast, or no, actually it's the first beast that comes out is Cetus that you see here. And then above Cetus, you have Andromeda, which I think is representative of the Babylonian whore, the whore of Babylon. You have Aries, which I actually believe represents the Lamb that's referenced all throughout Revelation, the 144,000 following him wherever he goes, opening the seals. I believe Jesus is intimately involved in what goes on in the tribulation in a good way. And so I think he's just kind of a centerpiece. It just kind of like falls in the middle of this tribulation timeline. So you see Jesus here, and there's plenty of passages that support the tribulation, Jesus' presence during that time. So moving on, this is Taurus. He's coming out of the abyss, I believe, here, and I believe this is representative of the second beast. And it's during this time that I think above him, and this is just a very weak hunch that I have, but I believe the two people that you see above him are the two witnesses, and I believe this is the time where the two witnesses, the beast comes out of the earth and kills the two witnesses, and I believe you're seeing this right here. And so the time of their power on this earth, the first 1260 days, is over, and the second beast is taking over. The Antichrist is taking over, and he's described as a lamb with horns. So you have this right there, or a ram. So moving on, kind of get squirrely a little here, but Gemini, I believe, and this is just from a pure chronological, I believe those are the two angels that, I don't know if it's in Revelation 14 or 15, but they're the harvesting angels that harvest the wheat and harvest the grapes. You have Cancer here, and I'm just drawing a blank here, so it's representative of something, trust me. But I do believe this is, I think I remember now. So I believe this is where a lot of the seals, the trumpets and the bowls are actually unleashed. And I'll get into that more, why I believe that. I know it probably is out of sequence and from what most people think or believe. But I believe this kicks off a lot of the end part of the tribulation. You have Hydra here, which I believe is very points to the judgment that's coming upon the serpent. So Leo, I believe, is representative of the return of the King, Jesus coming with his army, ready to conquer. And then when everything is finished, you have this cup here and you have the birds. The cup is being poured out. It's certainly referenced in association with the prostitute who rides the beast. So the cup of God's wrath is going to be poured out on the prostitute, the serpent, and then the birds of the air are invited to a great feast at Armageddon. And so I believe this bird here represents the end of the tribulation, establishment of the millennial kingdom. And so that completes a full 12-year timeline. And I hope this kind of whets your appetite. I'm new at this. I apologize if I ran long. I wasn't as concise as I could have been. But I do intend to do a part 2 covering the tribulation time period. And I guess that's all I have right now. So I just want to end just saying a quick prayer for everyone. So, hey, Father, I just thank you for all the people that that this message has gone to, and I just pray that that our eyes continuously seek you, and our eyes are fixed upon you as we await for your return and meeting you in the sky and receiving our reward. Don't let us become discouraged as different, I don't know, other signs that come and pass. Let us just continually to encourage each other. And I just pray for anyone who's hurting. I also pray that if anyone is out there that doesn't know you, that they will know you, that they will confess your name, that they can choose you today and be part of the church that gets raptured. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so that's all I've got, and you all stay blessed. Bye.